The texture paint's been applied and it's completely dry, and now we're on the home straight with just a few more details left to do. The first of these we're going to paint is the birds, and all of these, well, the first thing you should do with them is to paint them with Abaddon Black, and this is for the exact same reason that we did this with Archaon and Dorgar, just in case you need to neaten them up later on. Now the first colour for these is going to be a dry brush of Dark Reaper, and then we're going to paint the beaks and the feet with XV88. After that, we're going to dry brush across them entirely using Terminator Stone, but this will be a very light dry brush. But starting out with our first dry brush of Dark Reaper, I'm using my small dry brush to do it, and remember, all you need to do is get a small amount of the paint on your brush, get some tissue, and use it to work it in amongst the bristles and to get rid of excess paint. You don't want very much left in your brush before you start doing this. And then you just need to pick one of the sets of birds and start dry brushing them, really. So I'm going to start on this pair here, and you just got to be very light as you start applying this colour and gradually build it up. Now be aware that each of these birds has a small little connection point for the rest of the model that actually features another detail that appears elsewhere on the model. For example, these two birds have one of Dorgar's scales just down here. The other ones have a bit of scenery on them. Now all these parts you just need to paint in exactly the same way that you have done and will do on the rest of the model to help them blend in. Next, paint the beaks and the feet using XV88. Now I'm using my small base brush here, and just a quick tip for you, if you do accidentally put too much of this colour on, in particularly on the feet, and start to lose some of that definition, you can put some Agrax Earthshade over them just to bring back some of that detail. But you only need to do that if you put too much paint on. And finally, add a very light dry brush of Terminator Stone. Now this I'm going to be quite focused about. I want to mainly get it on the beak and the feet, but also we're going to add a small amount towards the ends of the wings as well. And you can see just how light I'm being with this, so the colour's not too strong. And once done this, the birds will be complete. And with that dry brush applied, the birds are now complete, and we're ready to start the final part of the miniature, and that is all the detail that's on the base. Now, there's lots of stone and building work on here, but also there's some smaller details, things like skulls, and also some pots and urns and things like that. And for these, you can really go into as much detail as you want. The skulls I've already painted in the same way that we did the bone on Dorgar, and as for the pots and things, well, you can paint them in the same way that we did all the silver and gold previously. But for the silver and gold, it's best to do that after the next part, which is to paint, well, all the stone and also all the building work as well. Now, all of these parts, I'm going to start by base coating them with Mechanicus Standard Grey. Then for the building parts, I'm going to dry brush them with Carrick Stone to give a bit of a difference between these two parts of stone. Then I'm going to paint all the ivy with Deathworld Forest. Then I'll shade all over these details at the same time with Agrax Earthshade. Now I'm also going to shade the texture paint too, and remember to make sure that texture paint is completely dry before you add anything else to it. Once the shade is also completely dry, we're then going to dry brush all of these details with Terminator Stone to complete them. So starting out with our base colour of Mechanicus Standard Grey, I'm going to begin with my large base brush because these details are quite large, so it's a good idea to get plenty of paint on at once. But it's a good idea as well to have some smaller brushes for when you get to those finer details. So once you have your paint ready on your palette, this is a simple case of just base coating all of these parts, and you can see them down here. And all you've got to do is paint all these open areas here. You can see one of the urns on the ground here. I'm not worried about that detail for the time being. I'm just concentrating on all of the stone. But remember to be really careful when you're getting close to Dorgar's tail. That's the time to start using a smaller brush to get all those details behind it. And you will need to apply 2 thin coats of this colour as well. Next, apply a dry brush of Carrick Stone onto all the masonry work with your small dry brush. Now this is just to give a nice difference in colour between all the stonework around here and all the rocks that we've got along here. So just gradually build it up until you got to a point that you're happy with. With that dry brushing done, we're now ready to start base coating all the vines and ivy-like plants with Deathworld Forest. Now be as neat as you can whilst you're doing this, so I do recommend that you use a small base brush. We're now ready to add a good coat of Agrax Earthshade to all of these details on the base. Now I'm starting out with a medium shade brush as I'm working up here, and this is because of Dorgar's body. You just need to be really careful when you're getting close to it so you don't get any shade on it. But if you're going to be shading the texture on the base as well, like how I'm going to be doing, then it's a good idea to switch to a large shade brush when you start doing all the details down here. But once you've done this, remember to give it plenty of time to dry because it's very important that it's completely dry before you start the next stage. Once that shade is completely dry, all that remains is to dry brush this detail using Terminator's stone. Now I'm going to do this very lightly and just gradually build up the colour, and I'm using my medium dry brush to do it because it's a nice good size for this kind of detail. Be careful though that you don't get any of this on Dorgar's body as you're doing it, so just be as neat as you can. Now I'm also going to be dry brushing all the texture in the same colour at the same time, so remember to get a good even coat of this, and once you've done it you can add some grass tufts if you want to, and even some blood for the blood god as well. After that, you just got to paint the edge of the base. Now it's up to you what colour you use for this. As usual, I recommend doing it so it matches the rest of your army, but I'm going to be using Mechanicus Standard Grey for my model. And with that, well, all that remains is the final assembly, and when you do that, remember to use super glue thin to put all the miniature together. The base is complete and the sub-assemblies have now been glued together, and with that, Archaon, the Exalted Grand Marshal of the Apocalypse, is finished. Now this miniature truly is a magnificent centrepiece of any collection. It towers above all of the miniatures, and what's more, it's just tons of fun to paint. So always remember, whenever you're doing larger miniatures like this, it's a good idea to think about sub-assemblies as you're putting it together to make the painting process easier. For example, with this model, it would have been so hard to paint Archaon's sword had we glued him to Dorgar before we started painting. Keeping these parts separate just make it so much easier to do a good job of the miniature. Now we used a lot of dry brushing in this video to get nice transitions between colour, and dry brushing is a very useful technique for doing this. But when you're doing it, remember to apply it in moderation and gradually build that colour up, because doing so allows you to achieve those nice smooth transitions between colours. Now we also used shade to do this, and when you are applying shade, always remember to be putting on the appropriate amount for what you're trying to do. It's very easy to lose control of it and get too much on the model, and then get it at places where you don't want it. So always remember to be careful how much you're putting on. And, in fact, speaking of that, always pick the appropriate size brush for the area that you're doing. This goes a long way to help out with your neatness, so it's a good idea to have a nice variety of sizes and then just jump back and forth between them as you need to. Now, as always, neatness really is the key when you're painting a model like this, especially a model that's so big like this that's going to be the centerpiece of your whole force. So really take your time with it to get those really amazing results so that you'll be proud of your model for years to come. Now we really hope that you've enjoyed this video because, well, we've had tons of fun making it and it's been quite an epic journey for us. We really hope you've learned loads and, well, that you enjoy painting your miniature. We'll see you again soon with another tutorial.